All right, Krystal, what's on your radar?
Well, after a stunningly good night for progressives in New York, Kentucky, and also in Virginia, the keepers of the centrist flame over at Morning Joe had a very daunting task ahead of them. After all, they'd spent years telling their audience that centrism was what voters really wanted, that the Democratic Party base was not nearly as lefty as all those Bernie bros would have you believe, that black voters in particular were enamored with the establishment and their corporate policies. So what could they possibly make of wins by Jamal Bowman and Mondaire Jones? That's to say nothing of progressive wins down ballot in DA races. Working Families Party and DSA candidates also appear to have knocked off maybe 3 or more Democratic incumbents in the New York State legislature. What could they do with the fact that Charles Booker may well overcome a nearly $40 million cash deficit to defeat Amy McGrath, the perfect corporatist middle-of-the-road candidate with the veteran trailblazer bio? She's everything they imagine that Kentucky voters could possibly want. And of course, AOC romped in her primary against an extraordinarily well-funded and well-publicized opponent. So faced with this slate of victories by candidates running on Medicare for All and the Green New Deal, many outright endorsed by the dreaded Bernie himself, how did they react? Let's take a listen.
It's tempting to read this as, progressives have, voters are looking for somebody that's more progressive, that's not part of the establishment. I think it's a little bit of a mistake to look at it that way. I think it's a rejection of the calcification of our politics, of people that have been in office for decades, in many cases.
See, guys, this has absolutely nothing to do with their progressive stances. That's not it at all, because of reasons and also because of other things. And so let's not learn the wrong lessons here. This is about people who have been in office for decades, but not like the way that Joe Biden's been in office for decades. That part is amazing and everyone loves it. But calcified politics with entrenched incumbents like the open seat that Mondaire Jones looks set to win, or the open primary where $40 million in national resistance hero status might not be enough to overcome a grassroots insurgent. You almost feel bad for them trying to come up with this stuff. Almost. To anyone who isn't desperately trying to preserve a now untenable narrative, these primary wins all point in one direction, towards a whole lot of enthusiasm for populist progressive candidates who are explicitly rejecting the status quo within the Democratic Party. Here's Jamal Bowman's message from election night.
We celebrate this movement, a movement designed to push back against a system that's literally killing us. It's killing black and brown bodies disproportionately, but it's killing all of us. It's killing us mentally, psychologically, and spiritually. It's forcing us to live in a country and in a world where so many people are hopeless and have lost faith, not just in the political system, but in each other. But our movement is designed to restore that faith, to restore that hope, to bring back the belief in what is possible.
And really, this momentum and the late surge for so many anti-establishment candidates came as a direct result of the protest movement which has swept the country. George Floyd was murdered on May 25th, just over a month ago. These candidates who are notching victories, ousting incumbents, and big money establishment favorites, they really met the moment. They were in the street protesting. Some were speaking about their own experience with injustice and brutality. The Senate race in Kentucky is still too close to call, with loads of mail-in ballots still out. But the fact that Charles Booker even has a shot is pretty unbelievable. I really think this was one of the seminal turning points in that campaign. This contrast right here says absolutely everything.
The protesters the last 3 days, or in Lexington or elsewhere? Ms. McGrath.
I have not.
And why?
Well, I've been with my family, and I've had some family things going on this past weekend. But I've been following the news and watching and making sure that I think we're in the middle of a pandemic, so we also have to look at is that the place to be right now? So that's really why.
I stand before you as your brother, as your cousin, as your neighbor, as your fellow good troublemaker. My name is Charles Booker.
Now, for those wondering whether the protest movement would ultimately amount to anything tangible, who worried about the lack of a national figurehead or a list of concrete demands, you have your answer. I've documented here the very real changes happening in cities across the country. But the protest electoral victories from Tuesday will reverberate not only on policing, but on the structural issues of economic justice. Jamal Bowman's victory, AOC dominating, Carolyn Maloney hanging on for dear life, they all punch way above their weight in terms of national impact. For one thing, Bowman is now instantly a national figure with a massive platform. That in and of itself can be hugely impactful. But maybe even more significant is the impact that these wins will have on the psyche of the establishment incumbent Democrat. Now, AOC could easily be written off as a fluke. That's simply not possible any longer. The gloves are off in terms of primarying incumbents from the left, and there's blood in the water. Back when AOC ran, there was one member of Congress who endorsed her. It was Ro Khanna, and he also endorsed her opponent. Now Bernie and the squad and even Warren and Katie Porter and people like that are jumping into the fray. Just as the threat of a Tea Party primary helped to push Republicans to the right, these wins will help to crystallize in the minds of incumbent Dems the very real threat of a leftist primary challenge. Crucially, the candidates surging and notching wins are not just the cultural progressive Warren types. All put economic rights and social democratic values at the center of their campaigns. Of course, as they serve as a check and pressure on their corporatist colleagues, we have to serve as a check and pressure on them to make sure they are standing up for what they claim to believe in. We all know how this town changes nearly all, even the most committed and most principled. They may not want to admit it, but everyone on MSNBC and everyone on Capitol Hill really knows exactly what these victories mean. You don't think Pelosi is looking at her own challenger, Shahid Buttar, with fresh eyes today, wondering how she could do maybe a little bit more on a few issues so that it's not quite so easy to call around as a hollow, fake resistance figure? Just weeks ago, recall, Pelosi felt perfectly comfortable publicly humiliating the left just for fun. And now, she may well think about a few olive branches, real ones, not the task force variety. And if she doesn't, Shahid's going to be waiting for her in November. And Sagar, that is really the value of these. It's going to be great to have Jamal Bowman here. He's going to be an important voice. Mondaire Jones and others, Charles Booker, if he's able to make it through the primary and huge uphill climb against Mitch McConnell. These voices matter in and of themselves, but the threat of having your own Jamal Bowman coming at you next primary season will do even more than those individual voices on their own.
It's going to do a lot. But I think that the second point you made was the most important one, is that the Tea Party thing only lasted for like 3 years.
Because
right?
then they all became just normal
Because then they all
Republicans.
became normal people.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, who really won there, right? Was it the establishment or was it the Tea Party? I think the Tea Party was like brief victors, but ultimately they all got basically co-opted to the establishment. I mean, look at them now. What are they doing, right? Basically the same thing. You got Thomas Massie out there doing whatever, doing his thing. So I think the most important part is to make sure that it's a sustainable movement.
Yeah.
And not just small one-offs, because they're going to do everything they possibly can to do to Jamal Bowman what they basically did to AOC, which is like, they're going to be like, yeah, all your criticism of us is like pretty mean-spirited, so like stop all that and just go after the Republicans.
Right.
And if you do that, you're all good. Now you're one of us. You know, you get the Pelosi endorsement,
The mama
all that.
bear.
I think that's the most likely scenario.
Well, the interesting question, and I really think it's an open question, because if it is a Biden administration, which looks like the most likely outcome today, do having some of these individuals in the House help to push Democrats to actually challenge the Biden administration and push them left? We saw this week a hilarious episode in which Maggie Haberman went on CNN and had the audacity to say that Joe Biden is not, in fact, a perfect candidate, that he is a flawed candidate, and that there's a long time till Election Day. The most innocuous, obvious pablum criticism you could possibly make. And there was this whole freak out meltdown. Now, right now, they're like, well, that's because we have to beat Trump, and Trump is Hitler, and it's an existential threat, and so we will broker no criticism. But as soon as he's elected, then we're going to be tough, then we're going to criticize him, then we're going to push him to the left. I think it's a pretty open question, because then the next conversation becomes, oh, but you're just helping the bad Republicans and whoever the next descendant, terrible existential threat Republican is. So it comes very hard to get out of that box. I think if you have activists in the street, as we've seen, if you have people like Jamal Bowman and AOC and others having a bit more of a bit larger of a group, and you have that pressure for incumbent Dems that they know if they screw up and they're too soft and they're too much to the right and they're too centrist, that they could face a threat in their primary, at least you've got a better shot. I'm not going to say that it's like for sure going to happen,
Right.
but at least you have more of a shot at putting some pressure on the Biden administration to actually do something.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking back through my political history. The last time, basically, what you're kind of talking about actually happened was Newt Gingrich against George H.W. Bush in the 1990s with the whole formation. This was before Contract for America, or I think around the same time. What they did was that Gingrich kind of like went after H.W., almost basically nuked his presidency in terms of the whole read my lips, no new taxes, vetoed budgets, and was a huge thorn in his side. We would have to see a lot more of progressives actually take power within the Democratic Party for that to happen. And I just don't see that because at the time, H.W. was so misaligned with the GOP base that Newt Gingrich and the rest of the party, kind of these new firebombers, were much more what the base wanted, even as a check on their own president. So we just don't know, how, like, in terms of who lines up with how much of the base and how much of the power that they actually have. You have to see not just one Jamal Bowman. You need to see a lot more Jamal Bowmans. And then you need to see him become like that, or AOC or somebody become like a House Majority Whip. I just don't see that happen.
But you have the young activist base that has led the charge on the Green New Deal, has led the charge on Medicare for All, has led the charge on defund the police. I don't think that they're just going to fall in line with whatever the Democratic Party tells them. I could be very wrong, but I think this is a group of people who don't really see themselves as Democrats. They see themselves as progressive. They have progressive ideals, but they're not like party loyalists in that way where they just fall in line. So if you have that outside pressure and you have some sympathetic voices, you could have some possibility there.
Yeah, certainly.
All right, next on Rising, while the full results are not in yet, it does look like more progressives could be joining Congress next year, as we've been discussing. Friend of the show, Nina Turner, is going to share her perspective on that when Rising returns.